haven't yet subscribed to the show. So could I ask you for a favor before we start? If you like the show and you like what we do here and you want to support us, the free, simple way that you can do just that is by hitting the subscribe button. And my commitment to you is if you do that, then I'll do everything in my power, me and my team, to make sure that this show is better for you every single week. We'll listen to your feedback, we'll find the guests that you want me to speak to, and we'll continue to do what we do. Thank you so much. Dr. Brian Keating. What is the mission that you're on?
I think I'm the luckiest man on earth. I get to get paid, not that much, but I get to get paid to study the questions that I was most interested in as a 12-year-old pimple-faced kid in upstate New York, which is, how did we get here? I think it's the question that people just want to know. It's the only question you can't know, right? What happened before you were born? You have to rely on other people's word for it, right? You have to ask questions and be curious. And what is the only event that ever happened for which there was nobody around to ask? And that's the origin of our universe. And the universe contains everything. It contains life, minds, consciousness, everything down to, podcasters and daily life.
What are some of the most sort of controversial existential questions that you seek to answer with all the research that you do?
So you've talked about this before on the show, the question of finite versus infinite games. And what we do in science is an infinite game, right? You can't win science. But along the way, there's many, many finite games. In other words, fixed competitions for which there's only one victor, right? I got offered a professorship at UC San Diego. That means 399 other people didn't get that job. I got tenure. A lot of people don't get tenure. I got this, I got that. And then eventually I didn't get, spoiler alert, my first book's called Losing the Nobel Prize, but there's only, at most 3 people that can win a Nobel Prize every year. In my field, the infinite game is comprised of many, many finite games. And the most important questions that generate the most controversy, the most heat, the most passion have to do with the nature of the origin of our universe. It's actually not a settled science. It's not actually known for a fact whether our universe came once, existed in a certain way eternally, in a way I can describe, went through cycles of creation and destruction, or it follows sort of a biblical creation narrative. These are all kind of open questions in a certain sense. And because they're not yet resolved, and because the only way to resolve them is through data, we cannot actually answer these. So the human mind is in a hybrid. It's in a superposition. We kind of have a lot of knowledge, but we have a lot of questions. We have a lot of solutions, but we don't have a lot of answers. We're trying to understand that fundamental question. And I always say, I want to know what happened on the Tuesday before the Big Bang. Imagine this, a day before which there was no yesterday. You couldn't even speak about it if you were there. Obviously, nobody was there to witness it. But even conceptually speaking, how does time progress if time starts? All right, we think about time, and time is very mercurial. It's very hard to describe, define what time is. Is time what a watch measures? Is time how my hair gets gray over the years? Is time how we perceive it, sitting on a hot stove versus being with a pretty girlfriend? Are those methods unequal? Are they equally valid? But at its base layer, if the universe began, if it truly had a singular origin, then time came into existence at that moment as well.
And how does the question of God tie into all of this? And what are the sort of, I guess the most controversial question is there a God or is there not a God?
Right.
And then a sub-question to that would be, what form does this God take? Are these questions that you seek to answer?
Me personally, yes. My colleagues tend to shy away from it. It's considered somewhat anathema or distasteful for a real, honest-to-goodness, workaday scientist to talk about, to even contemplate the possibility of God. And for me, I call myself a practicing, very devout agnostic, in the sense that I take my Judaism. In my case, I'm a practicing Jew. But the question of what to take on faith, which in Hebrew, by the way, the word amen comes from the Hebrew word emunah, which means faith. It means to believe in something. I always say, I don't believe in gravity. If I take this rock and I draw, I don't have to believe in it. I have evidence for it. Science, the word science means knowledge. It doesn't mean faith. It doesn't mean, religion or theology. But for me, thinking about God provides a certain, the most luxurious or the most delightful sort of spice to the research, to the hard work that I'm doing, knowing that the team and I that are trying to answer these questions, we can possibly resolve the question of whether or not the universe began as, for example, it begins in the Torah, the Old Testament, the biblical narrative that underpins the Judaism and Christianity and in Islam as well of, half the world's population. What if we could substantiate that narrative? What if we could refute it? A good scientist has to be open to both. So for me personally, I've always been interested in those existential questions. I don't put myself out there as as a rabbi or some exemplar of perfection as religion, but I'm trying. I'm trying to improve. I'm trying to dedicate my life to answering questions that others have posed and stand on their shoulders to hopefully get a closer glimpse of truth. But it's absolutely 100%, in my mind, inexorably linked. The question of a creator and the question of its creation or his creation, if you will. But as I say, for the first time in history, myself, my colleagues, and I, we might be able to start to answer that question with scientific hard data.
The question of whether there's a God or not and which God is most accurately represented by the science.
Yeah, and the creation stories that those religions tell themselves or tell the world.
You've raised a $200 million project. What does that mean? And what is the question you're seeking to fundamentally answer with that?
So for 2,000 years, most scientists, people believe the universe was eternal, had been around forever. And then, not far from here, in north of Hollywood, is a telescope, a 100-inch diameter telescope, 5 meters across. And that telescope was used by Edwin Hubble. Hubble observed that every single galaxy that he could see is moving away from the Milky Way galaxy. So every galaxy, which are collections of 100 billion suns, just like our sun, is expanding away from us.
How could he see that through a telescope?
So he used what's called the red shift. So the red shift is an effect that is related to what Christian Doppler discovered called the Doppler shift. You ever heard an ambulance and it's coming towards you and it gets higher in frequency? And it goes, where. That's the Doppler shift. The waves of sound are piling up. Their frequency is getting getting higher and higher. The wavelength is getting piled up in the direction it's going, the source, and it's getting lower in the opposite direction. The same exact thing happens with light. Instead of getting higher pitch and lower pitch, lower frequency means redder colors. So red is a longer wavelength of light than is blue light. He saw everything is moving away from it, us in the Milky Way. It was a very puzzling discovery. It went against 2,500 years of received wisdom. He observed it with data. It was incontrovertible. Every single galaxy is moving away from the Milky Way galaxy, our galaxy. He said either, we didn't put on our cosmic deodorant and no one wants to be around us, or the universe is getting bigger. Tomorrow, it will be bigger than it was today. The separation between galaxies will be larger than it is today. The implication, Stephen, if you go back another day before today, yesterday, things were closer. Keep playing that movie come together over the force of gravity. They will eventually fuse two hydrogens together to make helium and so forth, and you get the heavier and heavier elements. Eventually, those objects called stars, they eventually burn up and blow up in what's called a supernova. And before they blow up, they create all sorts of other matter that we're made of: calcium, oxygen, nitrogen, iron. And in their death throe, in their explosive fireworks-like ending of their lives, they give life to us because they blast out into the cosmos, into the galaxy, the material that we're made of. So literally, as Carl Sagan said, we are star stuff. And I brought some star stuff here today. So these are different byproducts. This is the shrapnel of an exploded star. This is mostly made of iron. Here, I brought these, and I give these away on my website. I made a special website for your listeners, briankeating.com/diary. Atmosphere, that's a rock like that, a mineral, coursing through our atmosphere at tens of thousands of miles per hour.
How'd you know?
How do we know? This has all the characteristics of a meteorite: its composition, its density, its structure. It has that weird pattern on it. But if you're really curious, what we found in Argentina, in a place called the Field of the Stars.
And this could have come from anywhere in the universe.
Exactly. This is basically a fragment of an asteroid that existed before the Earth, Stephen. This is a fragment, a fossil relic of our solar system from over 4 billion years ago, older than our Earth. Because our Earth formed at its core, our Earth has iron inside of it. It has an iron core, just like that. That's pretty heavy, right? And it also made this here. This, if you give this to your sweetheart, if you compress this by 100,000 times and give it to your sweetheart, like the natives that lived there several hundred or maybe even 1,000 years ago, this one's particularly nice. If you're not watching, it looks like a human foot.
And I can't explain how unbelievably heavy that is.
Yes.
I don't think I've held something that's this size but this heavy before.
It's extremely dense. It's the dense. So what happens when a star tries to make the iron in that? It takes more energy to fuse that nuclei of iron than is given off in the fusion process. So therefore, the star can't support listeners or viewers. Go to my website, and if they win one, and iron, which is primarily the constitution of this meteorite, has the exact same chemical structure as in your blood. There's a molecule called hemoglobin. Mm-hmm. It's almost identical to the chlorophyll molecule that plants have, except chlorophyll has a magnesium atom at the center of its chemical matrix. But in hemoglobin that's going through your veins right now is iron. That iron came from that supernova. Eventually your mother, and the food that you eat has some iron in it, and then your body starts to produce blood. And that blood has the same chemical composition as the stars.
So this 200 million, what are you doing with it?
Okay, we're going to get back to the money. Yep, exactly. So
what is the fundamental question you're seeking to answer?
So let's say you see someone shooting a gun, right? You want to see but you see the smoke from the gun, you see the bullet moving at great speed, but you'd like to see who actually shot it. Was it God? Was it Mother Nature? Was it some quantum fluctuation in the multiverse? And so we're trying to capture that, to take a picture of the infant universe, to take the earliest baby picture possible using sensors that are sensitive to microwave light that we cannot see, that's invisible to us. We could capture a pattern which would only be present if the universe had a singularity, if it went through this incredible rupture of space-time called the Big Bang. The details of the experiment were worked out over several years. We realized we had to go down to the South Pole, to the bottom of the planet, a place that was only reached 112 years ago. And the enemy of what I'm trying to detect is water. Water absorbs microwaves. That's how your microwave oven works to heat up coffee. So we took that telescope there. We made an observation. We claim we detected that baby picture, that snapshot, that reverberations of the creation of time and space itself, called inflation. We were heralded around the world that this was the greatest discovery of all time in science, literally. There was just one problem. When we made this measurement, we were aware that we could fool ourselves into seeing what we wanted to see because we knew how important this discovery would be, but we kind of convinced ourselves that we had seen the true birth pangs of the Big Bang. But it turned out we didn't see that at all. Instead, what we saw, dust in our galaxy, for technical reasons, mimicked the signal of the Big Bang. And we were crushed. It was literally dust. We saw cosmic dust, the leftover byproducts of exploded stars.
I just want to be clear here,
Yeah.
so I'm, I don't want to move on until I fully understand. So you went down to the South Pole.
Yeah.
You looked up expecting to see these waves that show that the universe is expanding.
Yes.
What you actually saw, like lines of dust.
Right.
Is that a simplified way of saying
Yeah.
it? But you thought you'd seen these sort of microwaves of the universe expanding.
Yes, exactly. It's simplifying it perfectly. We made this discovery, and then immediately, effectively in scientific terms, 6 months later, this is in early 2015, we basically had to admit we were wrong. And fortunately, for me and for the universe as a whole, I was very close with a man named Jim Simons. And he said, Brian, I've been thinking about this experiment, and I want to have a merger. So he put together this dream team, and we're still together to this day. We're building an observatory in Chile, not the South Pole, in Chile, to do what BICEP couldn't do.
BICEP being the telescope you built in the South Pole.
Yeah, that lost the Nobel Prize in my first book's language. And we're just now getting data. It got first light a month before Jim Simons passed away. And so we were able to show him the data that this experiment is seeing. I can't show it to you, as confidential as the diary is. You hope nobody's looking, but you don't know if anybody is. I can't show it to you, but the data is exquisite.
So what do you suspect is the origin of the universe?
Well,
is it God? Is it some kind of strange cosmic reaction that took place for no reason at all? I know you must.
If the universe began with a singular Big Bang, if it began on a certain day or it didn't, I just want to know the truth. The interpretation of it, that's going to be going on for, I mean, people are battling about, as I said, we thought we detected that signal, right? So we already have a simulation of what will happen when this is discovered for good, finally, and no dust, right? We know exactly what the media will say. At that time, on one side of the equation were the greatest, religious thinkers and theologians of the time, saying this proves the existence of God, that God created the universe in a singular moment. Let there be light, fiat lux. That's exactly what the Torah, the Old Testament, the Bible says. So they said it agrees with our hypothesis. On the other side, there were militant atheists, Richard Dawkins, other people saying this proves there's no need for a God. The universe came into existence, like you said, meaningless quantum field, a fluctuation out of nothingness. It proves nothing about God. In fact, it invalidates, literally, Stephen, there were people publishing articles in major newspapers everywhere that proves God, proves no God. So it's not like I'm going to think that I have the temerity to say I'm going to be the final word or we're going to be the final word. I know this is going to resonate and echo through the annals of history, but at the same time, we could also see nothing. And that's the hardest thing, when you see nothing. The human mind doesn't like ambiguity. Like you can talk about something very, non-controversial. Let's talk about abortion rights. Let's talk about trans rights. These are incredibly controversial things, right? So what does the human mind do? It selects a side. It says, no abortions. Abortions for everybody. No trans rights. Yes, trans rights. Immigration. No immigration. Yes, immigration. The human mind hates that. And for good reason. There's an old Yiddish expression. He who stands in the middle of the road gets hit by both sides of the traffic. So the human mind cleaves to one side or the other. I don't think, in terms of, religion or whatever, that we'll be the definitive final word on it. But it's sort of a privilege to play the game.
What is the most compelling evidence that you've ever encountered that there might be a God?
This is a long question. Well, I hope you'll find it someday too. At least in my religion, in Judaism, God is the creator and he's the organizer. He creates light and darkness. He creates day and night. He creates heaven and earth. He creates beasts and earth and fishes and so forth. And then he creates man. And we can't really emulate God. Even if you don't believe in God, you can imagine what a God would be like, right? You can conceptualize, imagine, King Charles, times a trillion, whatever, like the all-powerful force. But at the same time, we're told God is a father, our Father who art in heaven, right? And he's a Lord. He's like a politician. He's a king. He's their father in this Judeo-Christian concept. It's hard to kind of reconcile what that means because we don't really have analogies to it. But the one analogy we do get is the one thing that we can create, which is a human. Now, I think for that reason, men and women have a stake in what it means to feel a connection to God. Women much more so. It's almost impossible for a man to comprehend what it's like to have the ability to be a vessel for life's creation. I think that's part of the evidence for it. I also think that there's some clues, but again, it's not proof. You cannot prove God exists. You cannot prove God doesn't exist. You have to be comfortable with that ambiguity, and very few people are.
If we came from a single-cell organism, as some people say, then giving birth seems to be quite a new concept. Because, if you think about some of the evolutionary stories of, the single cell organism that then divided, and then, Darwinism's theory that it was the environment that defined how we give birth, and different animals give birth or replicate in different ways. So if you go back far enough, it seems that like giving birth as we know it, which is this like process where the baby comes out and they cut the cord, is actually quite recent in the history of consciousness, but also just like living organisms.
Does that make it more or less miraculous? Or
it's so amazing, but it doesn't feel like it gives me, I don't know, there's something in my mind that thinks if a single cell organism, I don't know, a gazillion years ago split.
And then you could ask the question, what if there was a creator, and this creator not only created that first cell, but created within that cell the possibility, the propensity, and had the knowledge, we can't comprehend it, but had the knowledge that will eventually make a person and have consciousness and be able to conceptualize God. Now, I'm not saying that's evidence for it, but just you can see which would be a greater miracle, that like God encrypted in the DNA code that eventually there'll be a Stephen Bartlett or Brian Keating, or that those are natural processes that are the inevitable conclusion of creation of life and evolution, as you say in Darwinian theory, for which we have abundant evidence, right? I don't know which is more miraculous. And that's why the first like Homo sapiens that are of our species, probably 200,000 years old, maybe.
So it's only been for 200,000 years that we've been able to think about the possibility of God, which is almost in a weird way. You could say God has only existed for 200,000 years.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And in fact, many people, and I like to say this, to you, like, what's your favorite day of the year, like on the calendar? I always ask people that. I say, like, what's your favorite day? And usually I'll get Christmas, my anniversary, my birthday, my first kid's birthday, whatever. But those are all origins. We're fascinated by origins because you weren't there. Like, you can't witness like the whole process of your birth. You have to rely on your mother and your father, and maybe there's some pictures and a nurse. But now go back to the beginning of the universe. Well, maybe there was only one entity. Maybe it was only God. And why did God make the universe? And then, of course, there's many, many questions. The most kind of stringent, or perhaps most challenging question is, why does evil exist? Why would a good God create suffering, childhood leukemia? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So the standard answer for that question is that to not have randomness, to not have chaos, to not have variability in life would necessitate a predetermined existence. And a lot of people believe that. I've talked to Sam Harris on my podcast. He's been on here. He believes strict determinism. Every single thing, what's happening to us right now, the words that are coming out of my mouth, your ear twitching or whatever it's doing, that's all determined. There's no control. There's free will is a complete and utter illusion. And because of that, then there doesn't have to be an explanation of why there's, leukemia in children or whatever. And yes, that is an unanswered question. And I think, but I don't think it's a sufficient question not to do stuff. People would ask, why does a child get leukemia? But they won't ask, why do humans experience the highest pleasures, the highest sensations, both physically, viscerally, but also emotionally and spiritually? That we, unique among all the creations on earth, have this ability to appreciate our finite existence, to have love, to have, whatever these connections are. That's what makes life living. Now, we can't answer why is that? Like, do we deserve that?
So for me, evil and good and like pleasure and pain make lots of sense from an evolutionary perspective. Mm-hmm. It makes a lot of sense as to why you would feel this overwhelming sense of like love and protection when you gave birth, when your son or your daughter arrives in the world, because that feeling is passed down from your ancestors, and your ancestors had that feeling, so they survived and their offspring survived, and that feeling gets stronger as it's passed down because those that have it are more likely to pass on their DNA. So the DNA of that feeling keeps passing through the generation. So I get that, and then with evil, I can also understand that pretty well, mm-hmm. Because if we think of evil maybe as a feeling or as something that happens or a disease, I can understand. The brain is so fragile, and I can understand all these human instincts and chemicals and jealousy and, even love comes with it. But, if a woman dies, it's probably her husband. And the complexities of all of that. What I can't understand is what active role God is playing in any of this stuff. And yeah, and I was religious until I was 18, and then I think I fell down a rabbit hole listening to like Richard Dawkins and some of the others and Sam Harris, and it left me in a position where I would probably define myself as being agnostic, but there's still this big question mark which hangs above my life, which is like, where did human life come from? And is it possible that it just didn't come from anywhere? Is it possible that there was a big bang, at the very start of all of this? It caused lots of reactions. One such reaction was fusing some chemicals, which fused in the right order over millions and millions of years, and it started to move in a way that like plants can't move, and that then led rise to this sort of evolutionary process. And now here I am, and my brain was just bigger 200,000 years ago than the other monkeys. So now that I've developed this thing called conscious, where I can think about things, and here I am trying to figure it all out now that I have this bigger brain thanks to Darwinian evolution. Is that the game? And when people hear me say that, they probably think, the natural reaction to that is because it threatens your sense of like purpose and belonging, and it threatens justice. Your natural reaction to that is, no, I hope it's not. And so let me think of ways that can't possibly be true. But I'm not tempted by that. I'm tempted by figuring out what's true, irrespective of how warm and fuzzy it is. And I still don't know. But I'm hoping science has some answers for me.
Well, yeah, sorry to disappoint. Right now, the connection, that logical chain that you produced, has a lot of so-called missing links. But you said something that's very interesting to me. You said you consider yourself an agnostic. And it sounds like, in other words, it sounds to me like you're doing things that an atheist does. Like you're not going to church, you're not, observing mass or whatever you would do if you're. But what do? And because if you're an agnostic, there should be some behavior that's similar to a theist.
Why?
Because then you're just an atheist, right? I mean, in other words, what practices, I'm a behaviorist in my life, so I judge people on how they act and how they behave, and you know a lot about this. So how do you behave as if there could be a God? You said maybe you want science to explain it. You didn't say like, I would like to have a personal revelation from Jesus. I would like to encounter him. Or whatever, Vishnu, I don't care what religion is. But how do you, in practice, live your life such that if God does exist, that it would make a difference in the way that you're perceived or judged, if you will?
Yeah, well, I don't, because I guess I don't know what practice, because I don't know what God exists or which story is true. I don't know what practice is true.
Do you think of God, let's say you were Hindu, right?
Yeah.
let's say you're not Hindu. Let's say you are what you are, Presbyterian or the Church of England.
But if I had a practice, wouldn't that make me religious?
Well, I'm saying, do you think if there is a God, we have to do this matrix, right? Let's say God exists, God doesn't exist. Stephen behaves like he's religious, Stephen doesn't behave like he's religious, right? So right now you're in one of those quadrants. You're not sure God exists. So you're behaving maybe as if he doesn't exist. I'm asking you, and now he could exist or he could not exist. So imagine you move into another quadrant. You say, I'm going to behave like I'm Hindu, or come down to my temple in San Diego, whatever. You're going to behave in some religion. Do you think if God exists, he's going to say, "Oh God, Stephen, you picked the wrong one. It's Jainism. It's whatever. It's Latter-day Saint." I don't think. I think a revolutionary statement. I think God has common sense. If he exists. If he doesn't exist, it doesn't matter what you do, right? But if God exists, he must have common sense, meaning that if you make an earnest attempt to understand or at least engage yourself religiously, not believe and force yourself to believe, not make excuses for evil that happens in the world or cancer for kids. But if you behave in a certain way, I don't think if God exists, big if, you'll be judged harshly.
This is exactly the conclusion that stopped me being religious when I was 18.
Really?
Yes, exact conclusion.
Say more
because
about that.
So we would go to church every week. We grew up going to church, read the Bible, all of those things. And then when I was younger, I was operating under this assumption that I was going to go to hell and burn if I didn't like obey this person in the sky. Then I read these books, Richard Dawkins' books, and a bunch of other books on the subject matter. And I heard that God was omnipotent and omniscient, which makes a lot of sense, because if you create this world and you can, you're active in it, you must be pretty powerful and pretty knowing. And then I concluded that I basically concluded God would have common sense. And I thought he would understand that I'm struggling. And he would understand that as long as I live a good life and I'm not murdering people and I'm not mean to people and I'm kind and I'm respectful to people and I'm a net positive on the earth, then if heaven does exist, any God that I would want to support anyway would let me in. And he would understand that I didn't have enough information to put my flag in any particular religion. So he would let me in. So my thesis then became, well, just be a good person, and you're kind of hedging your bets, because any decent God that's, I think, worth supporting would go, that was a decent person. He couldn't quite see it, whatever. But
I say I want to get in shape, Stephen, and I deserve it. Got kids, I want to be healthy, live a long life. But you see me eating, I wouldn't eat cheeseburgers, kosher, but hamburgers, French fries, just. And I'm saying, well, whatever we'll understand. In other words, you would agree that if you knew God exists, you'd behave very radically differently, right? If you had an encounter with God, Jesus or God himself, right?
It depends. If I knew for sure that he existed and a particular book and doctrine was correct, I would 100% behave in line with that book and doctrine. But if I knew he existed, but I didn't know which book was correct, then I probably would behave exactly how I do now.
So, but what
because the behavior, the practice, the Sabbath comes from one of those books or doctrines. So,
right, but even if you couldn't choose, right? What if it's what if it's possible that all of them are right and all of them are wrong? In other words, we are so frail, fragile, and inadequate to the task of understanding what the true nature of God is, that he made it such that, again, I'm not saying this is true, but it made it possible that there would be ways of interpretation for how he existed, right? Like, I, as a Jew, don't believe in Jesus' divinity, right? But I don't fault my friends, Jay Bhattacharya. I don't fault him. I don't. In fact, I think it's beautiful that that's his avenue for worship. He believes that Jesus died for his personal sins. Now, you would admit that you would have Jesus will still die for your sin, or he did die for your sins if you're an axe murderer. So I just think that level of saying, it's as long as I don't murder anybody, it's like me saying, well, if I'm destined to get into shape, I'll get into shape. My metabolism will work it out without me taking the serious action and working hard, because you do it in the rest of your life, right? And I'm not, by the way, I'm not proselytizing. It's actually forbidden in my religion. I'm not proselytizing, but that concept of God is that Richard Dawkins doesn't believe in. I also don't believe in that. Like, he's omniscient. He's going to prevent babies from dying from cancer. Or he's going to do this or that. Like, that's where they make fun of it, or they relegate it to a friend in the sky. You called it, right? I don't believe there's a friend in the sky. I don't think that even makes sense. But I believe that we are seeing something so heavily refracted. Again, if it exists. It's like showing a microwave telescope, showing Bicep or the Simons Observatory to, Gog, who lived in a cave 200,000 years ago. Like, there's no way to get from there to here. But that doesn't mean like there isn't an ultimate there and an ultimate here. For me, I let me just say the final thing I want to say, because I don't want to make too much about this, but there's a value in practicing even if you don't believe. Just like I say sometimes, like, even if you got divorced, like, you should still get married. Because it changes you and it opens you up to the full panoply of human experience that a lot of people don't get to experience. And when people have the capacity, the capability to do it, they should, in my opinion. By the way, I'm not advocating to get divorced either. But the point being, you obviously wrestle with it. And interestingly enough, the word Israel, which is the central country of Judaic faith, means fight with God. It means wrestle with God. El is God, Israel means fight. So how do you wrestle with it? Do you wrestle with it? Do you think about it? Or do you say, I'm not going to read these books that I read before I was 18 because it seems so childish to me now? And so
I do. I certainly wrestle with it. So when I say wrestle with it, not in a way that is causing me any pain or agony or deep frustration, but it's kind of, it's a recurring thought. And I actually think from doing this podcast and just maybe growing up and the journey I've been on, I have more questions now than I ever have since I became agnostic at 18. So I have more questions now. It's funny, I've been on this bit of an arc where I was certain when I was younger that God was real. And then I was really certain that the God I believed in probably wasn't real. And now I've kind of found myself going back to a position where I'm like, almost like I'm starting the research project again to figure out what actually is real. I sometimes wonder if I'm looking for the wrong thing, because I think because we've been so sort of indoctrinated into this idea that it is a man in the sky and all these things, the white beard and stuff. So we're like looking for evidence of that, but maybe I should be searching for evidence of something else. Maybe, is it like a feeling I'm searching for? Is it?
It's interesting that you said that. It reminds me of Einstein. Einstein said, he never asked his father, what would happen, Daddy, if I was traveling at the speed of light and I looked at myself in a mirror? And he said, it was good I didn't ask those questions when I was 5, because my dad would have given me the standard answer of the 1800s, which was, you see your reflection or whatever. And then Einstein said, I would have just accepted that. And then I would never have gone on to create the theory of relativity. What you said echoes what he said. Because if you had asked these questions and just accepted the belief that you had when you were 12, you would not be approaching them with the maturity of a Stephen Bartlett at age 32, right? And now you have this perspective. You have a wisdom that you've accrued from your life experiences, from the millions of people that you've helped around the world, to expose them to different things. And you're on a journey yourself. So anyway, I don't have tolerance for scientists that dismiss it and say it's stupid. And I'm like, but I also, I find that religious people are too comfortable with saying everything is described by God. Everything happens because of God. And I see this a lot with religious children. Sometimes I'll go into kids' school and teach them, about science. I'll bring these, props and stuff. But when I talk to them, sometimes I'll say like, oh, look, there's a rainbow over there. Oh, that's great. Where did it come from? And they'll say, God made it. I think that's, I joke, that's a form of child abuse. If you just say that God made it, you're A, completely ignorant about the science. But B, you're also diminishing God's power, right? If you say, no, actually that's an effect of water droplets, which are formed of hydrogen, oxygen, and here's their chemistry, and here's how they form a different state of matter when they're in collective, and here's how that causes light to diffract at different wavelengths, and here's wavelength electromagnetic radiation. Where does that come from? And you keep asking the question, why? Only when you get to the question, the final answer, I don't know. That's the only time I would say, okay, God could come in there. But that takes you back. That whole chain of refraction, of light, of dielectric material, of wavelengths, of color, all that stuff, that takes you back till almost to the Big Bang, which then intersects with what I do.
You said that you think of God as almost like a force. Do you think it's a conscious force? If I sit down and pray to this God, will they hear me?
I honestly could say I don't know, but I know that you'll change. I know that you'll hear yourself.
Okay.
If you can go down to the ocean, Steve, if you can go down to the Pacific Ocean and just be isolated and just pour yourself out for an hour, I guarantee it will change your life. You will be in tears, but no one will see you. And that's the thing. That's why you have to be alone. You cannot do it with any other person. You must do it on your own, because there's no Sam Harris meditation waking up app. It's not going to do the same for you as just you alone. And not knowing is part of the point, I think.
But what's that got to do with God? What's me going down to the beach and pouring my heart out, which would get me into my amygdala, it'll get me thinking about, it'll make me emotional. I can imagine, even listening to certain music can make you feel that. What role is God playing in that moment?
Because if God exists, I do believe that he's inside of you and that you can connect with him. Again, you can't detect him with an MRI machine, or you can't detect him with a laser. But, again, it's a big if. I'm not guaranteeing. I'm sorry to disappoint. I'm not that kind of doctor. I can't give you a prescription that'll make you believe. But to have access to it, you have to be open to a communication, right? Imagine you got, an email and you just never respond to it. Like people, remember the movie Interstellar? Have you seen that movie? So, the people on Earth are communicating with the people, Matthew McConaughey's daughter, and she doesn't know if he's listening, and he doesn't, and he knows that but in that sense, he's kind of like this God, like he has knowledge that she doesn't have. But if she doesn't try, maybe she wouldn't, maybe just the aspect of trying, the attribute of trying is what opened her up to that return signal, the communication that she eventually received.